the Teach Pitch podcast. We are very excited to be launching a series of interviews for Teach Pitch, a global community of tens of thousands of subscribers from over 205 countries who all have a desire to improve the state of education in this world. And for these interviews, we have selected a number of our subscribers who have achieved great things. And by great, I mean amazing. Think of former presidents, entrepreneurs, fashion designers, hospital builders, non-profit founders, authors, journalists, doctors, etc. And what all our guests have in common is that despite their great success, they've encountered many enormous challenges. So what were these challenges and how did they overcome them? That is what we are going to be talking about here. My name is Aldo de Pap and I'm massively looking forward and very grateful you can join us in this journey. So sit back, relax and download the podcast here.
I know in Bermuda we have this very kind of like pay your dues before you can speak type of culture. And, you do have people who have been in an organization for 20, 25, 30 years, and that's great. But it doesn't mean because I'm new or because of my age that I can't speak, that I don't have anything to contribute.
A very, very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you. Very happy you're back. It's Thursday, March 24th, and we have dropped another episode 39 of the Teach Pitch podcast. And for those of you who are avid listeners, and thank you, by the way, for listening to the Teach Pitch podcast in such great numbers. It's really awesome to see that our listeners are there and that you are growing in such massive numbers and that you're all over the world. It gives me a lot of joy to see where people are listening all over the world and where we are growing in the podcast rankings and getting feedback from people, getting your ratings and reviews. It really helps and it really drives us as a team. So not only me, I'm just the guy who's talking, but also our producer and our project manager and everyone who's involved. We think it's so awesome that you're listening to the podcast, and we're so happy to have you. And we want to engage more with you and talk more to you and discover more of you, because we think it's a journey that we're on together. Now, for those of you who have been listening from the very early start, we're all about professions. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to mirror, if you will, how people, got into certain jobs that are aspirational for all of us. But we're also trying to say at the same time that their journey wasn't without any challenges, and none of the journeys of our guests have been without any challenges, and yet they managed to achieve great success in their specific branch, in their specific niche, in their specific way. And it gives me so great pleasure that there are so many interesting jobs out there, really jobs that speak to my imagination and that really make me curious and want me to know more. And I think our next guest is no exception. She is a doctor, and her name is Dr. Carika Weldon. Her background is remarkable. She grew up in Bermuda. Bermuda is an island of 65,000 people. And she had, from a very early age onwards, had lots of scientific aspirations. And unfortunately, the island of Bermuda doesn't really accommodate to young women like her with such scientific aspirations. So the island doesn't have any universities. So you should most definitely kind of listen to her journey, how she went from Bermuda to university in the UK. And from there on, basically wheeled through her bachelor degree and then her PhD, then became the youngest university lecturer at a university in the UK, and then decided to go further into research. And all of that basically changed in 2020 when she was invited to come back to Bermuda, not as a young student anymore, but this time as the country's chief science advisor. And I think it's really amazing to see how Dr. Carika Weldon, who is very clever, very ambitious, but also very empathic, what her journey is like and how she became the chief science advisor to the premier of Bermuda and helped the people of Bermuda to navigate through the pandemic crisis. And her story is remarkable. So I most definitely hope you will listen to Carika's story. Yeah, so that's episode 39. We're very excited. I just wrote down a lot about our planning for the next 10 to 11 episodes to come. We've got loads of interesting people lined up. I'm very happy, and it's almost more kind of how we plan everyone at the right time. So that's really, really nice. But if you have any suggestions, then feel free also to send us an email or write on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever we promote the podcast, and share with us some ideas of people who you feel we should interview, because there are so many interesting professions out there, and we've had the president, the princess, an emotion scientist, a chief science advisor is what we have today, but a dog trainer, CIA spy, Navy SEAL. We've got so many. And I couldn't be more excited to have you with us on this journey. And I cannot wait what kind of the next episode will bring. So do ping us. Do let us know if you have any feedback or any ideas to share. We would love to hear your thoughts. And for now, I hope you very much enjoy episode 39, Dr. Carika Weldon, the Science Advisor.
We are so happy to be partnering with Hee Ha Ho, an interactive video platform that enables teachers and students to easily create amazing clickable videos for learning. Check out heehaho.com for more information and your free starter account. A big thanks to our friends at Zeus Maths Challenger, the only puzzle that effectively boosts your numeracy, critical thinking, and brain power. Go to czeusspuzzles.com to get your brain buzzing. And we're so excited to be working with the team at Learning Ladders, the only platform that provides assessment that goes way beyond tracking to effectively support teaching and learning for EYFS, primary, and secondary settings. Go to learningladders.info to find out more.
Yes, and here we are at yet another episode of the Teach Pitch podcast. And today I am very, very happy and pleased to be sitting across another powerhouse, if I may say so, in science. Someone that I came across on Twitter, and we'll talk a little bit in a little bit more detail later about how we found out about each other. But I'm sitting across Dr. Carika Weldon. For those of you who've listened to previous episodes of the Teach Pitch podcast, I had the great honor to talk to Gitanjali Rao, Time Kid of the Year, who is a kind of a young innovator and aspiring scientist, and really a young advocate at 16 years old for women and girls in STEM. And I was just, before clicking record, I told Carika she's the next version of a Gitanjali Rao. She's only a little bit older, but she has a very impressive academic career. She's from Bermuda, and after an extensive academic career in the UK, and we're going to talk about all the things that she did in the UK, but she was called back to her country or her island of origin to take on the role of the science advisor to the government, which is very impressive. Dr. Weldon, Carika, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to share my experience with the Teach Pitch podcast. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about all things science.
Yeah, no, most definitely, because we're going to talk a lot about that. Carika, you are 31 years young. And I see in front of me you have such an impressive path that you've walked already. You were a valedictorian of Warwick's Academy's class of 2008. You then won a scholarship and you got your bachelor in medical biochemistry from the University of Leicester, and also obtained your PhD in biochemistry at the same university in 2015. For both things, you got scholarships. So very good on you, and congratulations for realizing that. That's not where your path ended, because you then became the youngest full-time lecturer in biomedical and medical science at De Montfort University. And in 2018, you decided to dive back into research until 2020, when you got a call to go back to your island of origin, Bermuda, to help the people there. Now, before we go into kind of, the most recent past, I just want to hear from you, like, where did this all start? So you are originally from Bermuda.
Mm-hmm.
How did your path into science, how did that all begin for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kind of take, because in Bermuda, the common career routes are law or finance. Bermuda is known as like a hub of international business. And so because of that reason, there are a lot of jobs in that industry. And so a lot of people go into finance or into law, because obviously you need those two types of people in the insurance or insurance industry. So deciding to do science was definitely forging a new path. I'm not the only person that's going into science, obviously, but I know in my year group at work, I believe I'm the only one that is a scientist now. All of my friends are, either in IT or accounting or lawyers. But it all came about. I was actually stronger, and my strength is actually math. I used to do a lot of advanced math classes after school as extracurricular, but I always had this desire to help people. And I was also good at science, of course. And I don't know, from the age of like 12, I instantly said I was going to be a neurosurgeon. I had seen the story of Dr. Ben Carson, actually, and was inspired. And I said, I'm going to be like him. And for a long time, that was what I was telling everyone. Then I kind of realized, hey, dealing with people's brains is pretty serious and maybe a bit stressful. So let me change a bit. And I really like, interacting with children, and still want to help people and still love science. So I kind of shifted probably when I was about 16. I was like, maybe I should go to be a pediatrician. That might be a bit less strenuous on myself. And so that was the plan. When I was applying to university, which in Bermuda, we have no university. So everyone has to travel abroad to either the US, Canada, or the UK. So as I was applying to do medicine. And I made that decision because I felt I would have a better impact on people than if I was to go into finance. And I'm a people person. I like to, my face is very animated. I like to have those interactions with people. And so I decided I'd rather be working with people than sitting behind a desk doing finance stuff. That was a decision at that age. And I remember, going to my interviews because science isn't there's really no science careers in Bermuda other than a science teacher, maybe, and maybe, become a medical doctor, obviously. That's all I thought I could be at that age. And so when I remember doing interviews for scholarships, the question was, well, what are you going to do with what you're applying for? Because I had applied for medicine, but also had backups as, doing biochemistry, and just like, what are you going to do with that? Like, how are you going to come back home and use that? And I was just like, I don't know, but this is my passion, so that's what I'm going to do. And luckily, I captivated one scholarship committee, and they gave me a full-blown scholarship to go and do medical biochemistry. And I haven't looked back since.
That's amazing. That's a great story. And so, if I assumed correctly, as a young girl in high school, you said, okay, neurosurgeon, then pediatrician, but sticking to the sciences, wanting to help there. you said something very interesting, which I didn't realize, is that Bermuda doesn't have a university. So can you talk to me a little bit about Bermuda? Because, you know, as an outsider, I see beautiful pictures of beautiful beaches. I want to go there immediately, but of course, I want to go there as a tourist. But what is it like to live there? Could you give us an idea?
I can give you that. So yeah, Bermuda is a little dot on the world map. I mean, I think some world maps don't even have it because it's that small. It's 21 square miles. We are about 400 miles east of, I think, North Carolina into the Atlantic Ocean. So we're just chilling out here by ourselves. And so we have tropical kind of weather. So that's where you see the beautiful pictures. As a Bermudian growing up, I would say you don't appreciate the beauty as much because you're kind of used to it. But like where I live and pretty much everyone on the island, we're not more than maybe 10 minutes away from the water, maybe even less, 10-minute drive. It's a small little island. We are UK overseas territory, so we're not independent. But at the same time, we are, I think, unique in that we do have our own government. So we are like a self-governing colony of the UK. Yeah, I mean, growing up in Bermuda, like we have access to everything like everyone else. We watch a lot of US TV. I think our culture is heavily influenced by the US. Our food is as well, but we do have our own kind of unique Bermudian things. Like we have something called gumbays, which is actually inspired from Africa, and we have our own kind of like cassava pie, which I know is common elsewhere as well. Farine pie, codfish and potatoes is our kind of like national dish. You have to have it on a Sunday for breakfast. And yeah, I mean, it's a nice place to grow up. I think you don't fully appreciate that until you leave. And then you realize, oh, everyone wants to come there. So, you kind of have that moment when you leave. And I know everyone is probably thinking, is this the place that has the triangle? Yes, that is the question that every Bermudian gets when you leave. Is that like the same as the triangle? I've never gotten lost. None of us have ever gotten lost. The Bermuda Triangle is, Bermuda is one of the apex of the triangle that they have named after us. And, nothing gets lost. So don't feel afraid to come here. But I mean, growing up here has been great. It's very, I would say in a way progressive when it comes to women's, roles in leadership. We had our first female leader of the country, I think in 1996 or 1997. And so we haven't been, as restrictive in that way, which is great because you see people in leadership who look like you, right? I mean, definitely recommend coming to Bermuda and enjoying it. And but yeah, definitely leaving to go away to school is a big deal. Like I said, the majority of us everyone that goes into higher education has to leave at some point, and it kind of forces you into the real world. But again, part of what I would like to accomplish, if I can say, is to actually have a university in Bermuda so that because there are some people that just can't. Obviously it costs money to up your life and move to a new country. And so, yeah, that is a goal that I think Bermuda is going to try to attain at some point.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, what made you choose for UK universities? Because you say like there's a influential sphere of the United States as well. So you are also looking there. Did you also apply for US universities, or you said, no, I'm going to the UK?
Well, my parents were very thorough. And so they said, look, you keep all your options open. And I applied to 12 universities, 5 in the UK because that's what UCAS allows. 4 were for medicine, and I had a backup as medical biochemistry. I applied to 4 in Canada, and I got into all of those, including McGill, which was actually my pediatrician's alma mater. And I also applied to 3 universities in the US. I got into one, which was Penn State. But I don't know, I had this gravitation towards England from very early. I don't know, going to Europe. I think maybe because in Bermuda, it's a thing that you always travel every summer, right? Because 21 square miles can get really small. And so as Bermudians, we always kind of travel. We're known for that. But we used to always travel to the US. So I feel like I knew the US, go to Florida all the time or New York. And I've been on cruises in the Caribbean. And I just Europe was kind of exotic, I guess. And I wanted to go there. But also, funny enough, what happened so the year before I went to university, I went in 2008, in 2007, the law changed in the UK that everyone who was from a overseas territory of the UK would be treated as a home student when it came to fees.
Okay.
That made a big difference because,
Yeah.
I mean, the US as a non-American, I mean, even if you're not from the same state, you have to pay like the full-blown fees. You're talking about 20, 30 grand
Yeah.
a year. Canada was at the time about maybe 17, 18 grand a year. And then
Wow.
England, because they had made us essentially like British students, it went down to £3,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, it all worked out. I mean, I wanted to go that way, but then it all made sense. It was easy to convince my parents to let me go to England, even though it was the furthest.
Yeah. Because obviously, you excelled academically. You got into so many universities, and good for you.
Thank you.
And then the scholarships came. So were those initiatives in Bermuda to encourage you in your scientific path, or was this more found in the UK? How did that come about?
Yeah, so in Bermuda, because we have a lot of insurance, reinsurance, finance companies, they get a tax write-off if they give scholarship money. So actually in Bermuda, we have a lot of money available for scholarships. Actually, it doesn't get used all the time. But there are, there's scholarships, there are bursaries, there are grants that you can get to go with the university because, again, everyone has to go, right? So, and not everyone can afford it themselves. And so there is a big pot of money for that. I do remember because I was actually on scholarship at my private school. So Royal Academy was a private school. When I did the entrance exam, I didn't actually win. Someone else had won. And for whatever reason, they just said, oh, I don't want to go there anymore. So they lost it. And then I ended up getting the entrance scholarship. So I always felt like, what's meant to be will be. And, having been on that scholarship obviously meant I thought even at that young age of like 11 that I was helping my parents out, right? I shouldn't have been thinking about money at that point, but I was. So when it came to university, I really felt like, okay, I need to get the scholarship to make this happen so that my parents don't have this burden. And, so said, so done, like the scholarship that I won is actually one of the largest ones. It was for $30,000 per year.
Wow.
And you had that for every year that you went. I only had 3 years in my undergraduate, so it ended up being $90,000 that I got. And that covered everything from, obviously, $2,000 tuition. So, covered my travel, covered my accommodation, covered my food, all of that. Me to be able to come back to Bermuda on my breaks. So my parents didn't have to worry about anything. So I felt that like big weight was off their shoulders. But it was definitely huge because I wouldn't have felt as good going away to study something that potentially could have taken a lot longer if I hadn't got the scholarship. So that definitely made a difference. But that's definitely I would say a benefit or kudos to the scholarship community in Bermuda that they are forward thinking that okay, we need to invest in our future.
Yeah, that's definitely very good of the community there, of the people there, that they say, hey, how do we allocate our resources as such so that, the next generation can have a proper education. We're going to dive into your challenges, Carika. As your first challenge, and I think we've already been talking about it a little bit, you said that it was difficult for you to forge a new path. And I think, forging a new path, if there's no university on the island you grew up, and then, wanting to become a scientist among a community of people that are, end up in finance or insurance or in, accounting, a little bit more corporate focused. What more was new about your choices, you feel?
Yeah. So when I did my undergraduate in microbiochemistry. Before I left, I always thought you had to do a undergraduate, then a master's, then a PhD. That isn't the case in England. Like you can go straight from undergraduate to PhD. But in Bermuda, that wasn't really common. So having been exposed to that, I was like, oh, okay. I really liked my research project that I had in my last year of my undergraduate and was able to get a position in that same lab. I remember my supervisor, whose name is Professor Ian Apperon, shout out to him, he's awesome, for my undergraduate project. He actually said, you know what, his wife, she's a scientist as well, And she said, well, you got a scholarship for your undergraduate. Could you not get one for your PhD? So I was like, hey, it's a good idea. So they actually created this position out of thin air for me to do this project that they had sitting there. So it was that lab, Professor Apron, and a new professor that had came, who was named Dr. Cyril Dominguez from France. He was opening up his new lab, and he had this project he wanted to do, but didn't have money for it. So it was almost like a perfect fit that I could get money and do this cool project that he wanted to do. And so they created this position that wasn't there for me to do this project if I got the scholarship. And I remember applying to the postgraduate scholarships now, and this particular scholarship committee, they said, well, if we don't give you the money, like, how are you going to do this? And I said to them, and thinking back, I don't even know, like thinking back, I was like, wow, I can't believe I said that. But I said to them, well, God told me I'm doing this PhD. So if you don't give me the money, someone else is going to give it to me because I have to do this PhD.
Yeah.
And they must have been like, what? And that same night, they called me and gave me the scholarship. So now I had found the funding to do this cool project that they wanted to do but didn't have money for. Did my PhD. I remember I traveled all over the world. And these are not new things, right? These are things that happen in common in the UK. But when it starts to get a bit different is when you do a PhD, usually right afterwards, either you go into industry or you do a postdoc, which is you go to another lab. You're already a doctor, but you go to someone else's lab and you work under them for maybe 5 to 10 years. And you're not, in charge, but you're, obviously more senior. You're doing your own research. You have a bit more autonomy and you're publishing papers so that you can get a good reputation to get a permanent academic post. That's usually how it is. And I remember I was in Leicester. So you have University of Leicester and De Montfort University. During my time in my PhD, I used to sing in a gospel choir at De Montfort University. So that was like my release, right? My stress release. And I remember the Christmas before finishing, I happened to run into the deputy vice chancellor of the university, and I play the violin as well. So I'm classically trained in the violin. So I was playing the violin with the choir. And I was the only one in the choir at the time that wasn't a student at De Montfort University because I was at the other one. And so like, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm doing my PhD at the minute, but I would really love to be a lecturer at De Montfort University. I'm doing my PhD in biochemistry. And he said, yeah, we need more Christian lecturers, and speak to the vice chancellor and tell him that I sent you. So I was like, okay. So that's exactly what I did. And literally that was December. By February of the following year, I was now a part-time lecturer at this university. I was just doing marking, but my foot was in the door. So I was like, this is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
Did not dream that it would be during my PhD and also part-time lecturing.
Yeah.
Then I remember the day I had my Viva, which is your exam for your PhD, that same day, they released or started to advertise these positions for a research lecturer. They wanted to increase the amount of researchers they had so they can increase their research profile. And the head of the program that I was working with said, please apply. Like, we need you to apply. This will be a full-time job now.
Yeah.
I was just, are you sure? Like, are you sure this is what I should be doing? Because I was so conditioned that I had to do like 5 to 10 years in another lab and get a postdoc.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, apply. And so I did, had the interview, and by December, so I got my PhD officially awarded the 1st of October, 2015. By December 1st, I was a full-time lecturer at this university. And I was just like, what? And everyone that I used to like meet at conferences, and, I kept going to conferences. So, you would see them every year. I'm like, oh, how you doing? And like, my project's doing great. So now the next time I met them and I was like, yeah, I'm a lecturer at this university. And they were just like, how did that happen? Like, cause that wasn't normal, right? To just skip the postdoc altogether.
Yeah.
And I remember I I do remember my supervisor at the time when I was doing all these kind of like teaching things on the side, and he was like, no one's going to care about that when you're applying for a postdoc. And now when I applied to be the lecturer, that's what they were caring about. And so, that challenge is, forging a new path for yourself, but it not being something people have seen before, but still believing in yourself that you're going to get this done.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily leaning too much on, well, this hasn't happened before, and saying, okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe I shouldn't bother. Yeah, that was definitely one of the challenges I've had so far.
And you were, let's not forget, you were barely 25 years old, or
Yeah,
maybe even younger.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I graduated. I was 25 and I had my PhD, and I was 25 and a full-time lecturer, to the point where the students would walk into the classroom and be asking, "Where's the lecturer?" I'm like, "Me, guys," and they're like, "What?" And so I used to get mistaken for being a student all the time. But it was definitely, I think within myself, I did have some doubts. I was like, yeah, this can't be it. This can't be how it's going to go. But it did. And, there I was at 25 giving
Yeah.
lectures in chemistry and biochemistry.
I'm interested about what you said about being a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and when you speak about God, I can imagine that that's a discussion that goes on many levels, specifically in scientific circles. Am I correct?
Yes, yep. I mean,
Yeah.
I got questioned a lot, like, how can you believe in God and be a scientist? And my reply was always, well, I actually feel getting to know how the body works is convincing me even more,
Yeah.
because the way that this has all been put together so intricately, yet run so smoothly, it can't just have happened randomly. Like someone had to
Mm.
design this, right?
Mm.
That has definitely always been a conversation. And you also have, I think more recent scientists feel that there isn't a God, right? Which is up to them. That's their prerogative. But if you go back to people like Newton, they used to acknowledge that, these thoughts that they were having were from God, so it is a controversial topic, but I think, again, forging a new path and, just staying true to who you are and your convictions. I wasn't going to let the fact that I was a scientist, waver my beliefs.
No, 100% you shouldn't. But I can imagine that there's just, the discussion it goes on many levels, because there are
Yeah,
scientists who basically say, well, we've got all the facts here. Why talk about a God? And
yeah,
then scientists like yourself who say, well, it is so beautiful. It's so ingenuous. So, who do you think came up with all of that? So, both are equally valid, but they might be a little bit opposed to each other. And some
mhm,
also agree to disagree and respect each other, as you say, like, you think whatever you think or feel whatever you feel. This is your version of events, right? So that's great. So then you're 25 years old. You are the
mhm,
youngest lecturer ever, youngest full-time lecturer ever at the Montfort University.
yeah,
And so and this position you have for 3 years. Is that correct?
that's
Yeah.
correct. So that was
Yeah.
a permanent post, but I decided to resign and move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And could you tell us why? What made you want to move on?
Yeah, so I really enjoy teaching. I like I mentioned, I love the interaction. I love seeing when I'm explaining something and the person gets it. Like you could see when it's like, the aha, I love that. And obviously I have a passion for science, so sharing that passion I loved. But as I mentioned that before, the post was supposed to be a research lecturer. And I was actually doing teaching more than I was doing research. I didn't get a lab space for like almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And they had given us, I think it was like an allocated split with our time for research and teaching, and that lasted the first 2 years. So I was like, the whole time I had this split, I didn't have anywhere to do research. So in theory, they wanted to do, great things, but it's just the resources didn't match. And I wasn't able to kind of, I guess, reach my full potential, what I had hoped. The other thing I did face was this whole thing about my age. When I joined the department, so in science you have to publish papers, and where you publish the paper matters.
Mhm.
There's something called an impact factor that every journal has, like a score of how important publishing research in there is. And when I had joined the department, I brought with me, based on my PhD and what I had published from it, the highest impact publications that the department had. So as a scientist, I was, holding my own, but I kept being kind of treated a certain way because, oh, you're the new person. Oh yeah, you're new to academia. Oh yeah, you just finished your PhD. And it was always kind of this reference to my age when it wasn't really needed, I came with fresh ideas. I came with, I wanted to take students from the university and bring them to Bermuda because we don't have one, and take them around to all of the schools and do science workshops. They did, I was allowed to do that because they had this program called DMU Global, but the support from my department was like, what? You take them to Bermuda? It was kind of like looking down on me, and I didn't like that. I realized at 28, I said, well, I do have a permanent post, but doesn't mean I have to stay here the rest of my life. And so I had the opportunity to actually go back into full-time research at the University of Oxford.
Yeah.
And that was my dream job. Like when I was actually in Bermuda applying for university, my dream was to go to Oxford to do medicine and then come back home and open up my pediatric practice. So to have the opportunity to now go to Oxford, but now be paid as opposed to paying to get taught, I was over the moon. And so that was another kind of forging my own path, because I put in my resignation. Obviously, my colleagues knew that I was leaving. De Montfort University is like, lower down the charts when it comes to research. And for them to hear like that I was going to be Oxford University, I had some people ask me, "Are you talking about Oxford Brookes?" I was like, "No, I'm talking about Oxford University." Like they were just shocked that like, how could I go from this to that? And so I went back into full-time research in November 2018. Yeah.
Such a good step. So you resigned before getting the position at Oxford?
Position like in the works. Actually, from it's funny. The conferences that I was doing through the Bermuda Principles Foundation, which I founded after I finished my PhD in my country as a kind of like a science outreach charity. We had an annual conference. I'd done my second one, and I had actually invited the premier to like open up the conference. That was like a different thing, right? Like what government leader opens up a science conference, right? I don't know why. I thought that was a good idea, but I went with it and he said yes. So he came and opened it up. And that same conference, he introduced me to a couple in Bermuda that really was impressed with the way I was coming back. Because one of the things that does happen in Bermuda, because we all do go away to school, is we do have a bit of a brain drain where people go away and don't necessarily come back because they're away, doing awesome things. And they were just impressed that I was still mindful of where I came from and was coming and giving back and, doing my outreach. And so I shared with them my frustrations where I was, and they were helping me to kind of look at options. And so I had that in the works. I didn't resign until I had the post. And that was, guaranteed, but was working on it in the interim leading up to that. But I think I resigned in September and left, 3 months later in November.
Yeah. We've actually already discussed one of your challenges, and I would like to just take a slightly deeper dive into it, because you say age. You were extremely young.
Yeah.
I think not even 25 when you got your PhD.
Yeah.
Then you become a full-time lecturer. Then you become a researcher at Oxford, like the big Oxford.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you go back and forth from the UK to Bermuda, and you give back to Bermuda on an extremely high level, as you said, with the Prime Minister present, and kind of all those things are happening. And as one of your challenges, you mentioned like people always want to kind of almost have a discussion around my age, and justifiably so. You earlier mentioned it doesn't matter age, and funnily enough, that's also what Gitanjali Rao told me and other kind of young people and young women, particularly in STEM, to say, well, this is not a conversation about age.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's still a problem. I think at a certain point, like I think now people don't ask about my age or don't really care because of what I've accomplished, right? The results speak for themselves. And then when they find out, they're like, oh my God, being so young. But it wasn't always like that. It was like, well, what do you know? And I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that like us young people know everything. We don't. And it's having mentors who, can pour into you that are really important. But it's more so a conversation about don't limit what you think I can accomplish because of my age.
Yeah.
I think the other part of it as well is I know in Bermuda we have this very kind of like pay your dues before you can speak type of culture. And, you do have people who have been in an organization for 20, 25, 30 years, and that's great. But it doesn't mean because I'm new or because of my age that I can't speak,
Yeah.
that I don't have anything to contribute. And then when it comes to science, I never really experienced in the science community like, oh my God, you're so young. Because I think as scientists, it's just like, if you could be an infant and discover something and you'll get credit for it. That's kind of how it is. But it's more about like the non-science part of being a scientist, if that makes sense. All the other stuff is like, oh, well, do you know what you're doing? And I'm just like, yeah, I think I do. And that kind of as well, I think plays into the other challenge I mentioned to you, which was like this imposter syndrome, because you're being questioned so much, you're like, oh, actually, do I know what I'm doing? And you start to ask yourself, like, are they right? You start to doubt your own self. But yeah, I mean, there shouldn't be a conversation about your age as you're doing the work. If you're getting it done, you're getting it done. And that's just it. And when it came to, the next step of the story, obviously I was at Oxford it was basically for 2 years, but up until November 2020, but then COVID happened. I was asked to come back. I came back in April 2020 to Bermuda, and at that time I wasn't even 30. I was 29, so I was still in my last few months of being in my 20s. And I came, and within a matter of like a week, I was appointed as the science advisor to the premier. And again, having direct access to the leader of the country, and not just access, but influencing what he was doing, because I was advising him at the age of 29 was a problem.
Yeah. Well, for who was it a problem? For the people around the prime minister? Yeah,
because I mean, it's again, it's just like you need to pay your dues and you have to work your way up the totem pole. And I've been here for 25 years type of mentality, not the fact that, okay, you are the expert, because obviously the RNA virus and it ended up being an RNA vaccine. I'm an RNA researcher, and the premier knew that because of the conferences I've been inviting him to. So he knew the type of scientists I knew, and that it was all about RNA. So instead of saying, you're the expert here, please give us your advice and accept that, it was like, oh, but you're so young, your age, you don't know. And that was definitely a source of contention. And the other part of it was not just the age factor. I think it was also the fact that I hadn't been in Bermuda, like working. I was obviously away. I wasn't in the ecosystem of Bermuda. And to just come straight in and have that access and have that influence. Whereas some people have like built up their career over the last 25 years to have that influence or have that close to that influence. Yeah, that really upset some people. And not just upset them, but they actively put barriers in place because they had the power to do that, and they did. And so it became a struggle daily to just get simple things done. And I'm not trying to bash my country. I think this is probably how it is in other, big corporations or, other governments as well. But it needs to be fixed, because especially in a worldwide global pandemic, I think it was the last time you needed to be talking about like politics and, well, this is what I should be doing this because I'm the important one. All of that needed to kind of go away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a shame that indeed, these times of crisis are then being politicized, right? And I think we've seen it in the United Kingdom. We've seen it in the US,
Yes.
So I'm sure in some shape or form it also happened in Bermuda, whereas people just have problems sticking to the scientific facts. You
Yeah.
didn't get this position, it wasn't nepotism. You
Right.
have the proper academic scientific background. You can make the calls on a scientific level
Yeah.
to say what works and what doesn't work. So that is why you were sitting next to the premier to kind of, advise on that level, right? You weren't making the decisions, you were advising on that level. So
Right.
if people who do not have such a background then think they know better, I think that's really poor judgment. And
Right.
shame on them for trying to prevent you from helping out on a scientific level, because at the end of the day, that's what was, urgently needed, right? So, but you did sit out the task, because I've seen these images of you on YouTube talking to the people, being on TV, talking about the virus and how these things happen. How did all that go about? Was there a big panic in Bermuda like there was everywhere else in the world, or how did it hit Bermuda?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we as a country are, like I said, a little island, right? We have one airport. We can control everyone that comes into the country. So we shut down like everyone else in March. But again, because science isn't really that big here, there wasn't really anyone to explain what was going on, right? And so if you don't explain stuff, people fill in that, there's a gap or a void of knowledge. They were filling it with their own stuff. And obviously everyone's on the internet and looking at this and looking at that. And so there was a lot of panic when I came, but just primarily because they didn't know. And, obviously the U.S. had Dr. Fauci. I think we always used to kind of refer to him, where he would get up and, as the scientists explain what was going on. We didn't have that. And we don't have any scientists that are in government. There was none. And so, I mean, obviously you have medical doctors, but medical doctors are not scientists. Not all of them. You have some that are both. But yeah, there was no one to kind of like explain to the public, this is what this is how this works, so that everyone got the understanding and could ease their anxiety. And so that was, I think, part of why, panic was happening and unrest and just, it was a bit of chaos going on. That's also part of why I was appointed, because the premier had actually sat through me giving an hour lecture about my research in 2017, actually. That's when we first met. And he showed kind of how to engage with the crowd. Like, I like to make people laugh and have analogies and like make people relate to stuff. And so he was aware of that. And obviously I was a lecturer for 3 years. And so, used to teaching. And so I think he considered that, and that was part of his decision to make me the science advisor, because now at conferences, I was the kind of like science authority. And I remember actually at my first conference, press conference I had to do, which I wasn't prepared for in terms of like clothing, because I thought I was coming here for 2 months to just be in a lab in a box, sitting in the corner. So I just bought like casual clothes, and then I was told, oh, you're a science advisor, you have to do a press conference. I'm like, oh Lord, I don't have the clothes for that. So I had to like frantically find something to wear. But I remember at that time, that was like about a month after I had arrived, and I was asked, because there are people that don't think you can do this. What do you say to them? And I just said, well, let my actions speak for themselves. Just watch what I do. And that was kind of my approach to the whole thing was, I can hear all the stuff happening, and I could see the active resistance for what I had to set up this new lab from scratch. And it could have been a lot easier, but it wasn't. But, just get the work done, because no one can fight or argue with that. That's facts, right? But yeah, I really enjoyed being in that position to advise the public and give them the analogies, and got lots of good feedback that, what, before you explained that, I didn't understand it, but now I do. And just from a layperson, so even now when I walk on the street, even I think it was last week Friday, I was walking to go get my car that had to be serviced, and someone stopped me and she said, what, I got the vaccine because you explained it so well on TV. And now I went and with more understanding was able to go and look into it. And then I made the decision on my own. And that is like the best feeling ever.
Yeah, that's all you needed, right? So someone that says, okay, I could follow you. You explained it to me like I'm 5 years old, and I built from there. Yeah. I want to go back very quickly about what you said about imposter syndrome, and I want to link that to something that I read on your website, because on your website, and when I say website, is you have founded a charitable organization called Bermuda Principles, which is actually all about helping the next generation of Carika Weldons in Bermuda. So it's an organization that is investing heavily in science, among others through, a variety of conferences, but also scholarships. And we're going to talk a little bit further down about plans for a new center that you want to build. But on your website, you mention one concern, and you say it's sad to say that science is not accessible to all. Women in science is vastly underrepresented, with less than 30% of global researchers being female. This is a constant struggle. Simultaneously, there's a lack of diverse ethnic groups in science. I am both, having no role model I could associate within my upcoming science career. I've made it my mandate to be that role model for all who can identify with me as a woman, as a diverse ethnic group, and from a country where science is not the norm. I mean, this sentence, first of all, beautiful, and thank you for showing such levels of bravery of putting yourself out there and saying, let me be the example to lead. But I can imagine that because you didn't have that role model, you didn't have that example, you might feel like an imposter, right? Because where's the other Carika Weldon? Where's the Dr. Carika Weldon from 20 years ago or 30 years ago? There might not be many, right? Do you think that has anything to do with it, or do you think there's more to it?
I think that definitely has a lot to do with it. I think I've gotten past that stage now, although I do have moments when I'm just like, is that me they're talking about? Like, I mean, last week, for example, was International Women's Day, and I was awarded Woman of the Year in Bermuda for 2020.
There you go. There you go. Congratulations.
Thank
well
you.
done. Yeah.
And I remember I was sitting there like listening to them read my bio out, and I was just like, that person sounds really cool, but it's like it wasn't like it was me. So I was listening to about someone else, like, and so I definitely only started to have imposter syndrome once I became Dr. Weldon. It was because I was just Carika, right? Prior to that. It took me a long time, like a few years, to get used to being called Dr. Weldon. Like the only people I would let call me Dr. Weldon was my students, to like have that barrier. But people that knew me before, I usually like, don't call me that. Like, I don't know. I didn't feel like I was Dr. Weldon. Like I just felt like I was Carika. And again, with the, challenges of being questioned about your age, and, sometimes in England, unfortunately, I was also getting certain behaviors because of my race. So that's another conversation. But it's just like, am I really what I'm saying I am? And also I felt it at the beginning of starting the charity. So just briefly, the Bermuda Principles Foundation, it's based on actually the Human Genome story, the Human Genome Project story, because during the Human Genome Project, there was a meeting in Bermuda in 1996 where all the heads of the labs that were doing it came because they didn't know who was going to own the data. That was like general this data, but didn't know who owned it. They came and they decided that the whole world was going to own it, like no one was going to patent it, and that they were going to put that information into the public domain within 24 hours, so they all kind of knew what was going on, and they drafted that in a document and called that the Bermuda Principles in 1996. That was the kind of first time that information sharing was kind of like thought to be so should be so public like that, and not trying to just capitalize and make money off of it. And actually, the Bermuda Principles was I would say like a inspiration or a premise that other industries decided how they were going to handle data ownership and data sharing as well. And so I saw that and I was like, this is amazing. Like, we're actually in the story of the human genome. Like, and so I created the foundation to like let Bermudians know that we were in the story, but then also use it as a platform to encourage science amongst, Bermudians. But I have and did build like a kind of a global brand around it by having these international conferences and tell that Bermuda Principle story like I just did, and link that into outreach in Bermuda. But yeah, doing all of that, even like I remember we had like a former Nobel laureate, one of the gentlemen who actually co-discovered splicing, and my field is splicing. So I was like having a real geek moment when I met him. But he came to Bermuda we had like a gala in the third conference we had in 2019, and I'm just like, I actually have the Nobel laureate who discovered my field in my country, at this event that I organized. It just, it hits you sometimes, and you do question, like, is it real? Am I really who I am? But I think this whole experience with COVID for sure was a catalyst to me kind of dumping that away and saying, yeah, you are doing it, because, sometimes I used to doubt the advice I was giving, or doubt I even knew what I was talking about. And then afterwards, I'll be approached and like, oh, that was perfect and that was great. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. Like, but people wouldn't know that I was internally like feeling like I was an imposter. But it is something that I think we all may go through when we get to that level where we see we're achieving. And I guess if I had to give advice on how to get through it, is to just keep going, and believe that you are who you say you are. Because even like today, right before this, I had a meeting with someone who is getting into this space of raising funds, and I was explaining the project that we're going to touch on, what I'm trying to do, and he was like, this is gold dust, and I was just like, oh, okay. And so it's really just about, you are who you say you are, and you are that person, and you are the change, and you can have that impact that you want to have. But it doesn't come, or it didn't for me, it didn't come instantly.
One thing that I could also say is like, for on the level that I've maybe had a little bit something like imposter syndrome, it's like it's almost, these are different situations in your life. You previously mentioned it's like about getting the work done, right? If you're in a laboratory and you do all the work you need to do, if you're doing your research, if you're doing just your action list, working yourself through the items, then there's not a moment that you kind of pause and reflect and have imposter syndrome, right? That's not the moment where that happens. I think it's more the moments where you're at a gala, maybe wearing a beautiful dress, and then the Nobel laureate comes in, which is in and of itself kind of a glittery moment, I can imagine, that makes you reflect on things like, oh, is this real, right? And it's a snippet of your life that makes you think. But at the end of the day, I think we all know that it's, the hard work that does the trick. I mean, you are where you are because you worked hard for it, right? So it's your academic drive and all the hours you've put in there that gave you the opportunities where you are, and no one can argue with that, right? So I think that's, and when I'm working on my companies, then I'm also kind of, there's a lot of hard work and none of it is sexy. It's just kind of getting through your day. And sometimes there are moments as you're like, oh, wow, that looks nice. Is that me? Or something like that makes you wonder, like, but, these are just so, as I say, kind of little snippets that make you ponder and think of where you are today and whether you should be there, yes or no. Thank you so much for sharing your 3 challenges, Carika. So forging a new path. We spoke about your age, people mentioning your age and experience and holding that against you for the wrong reasons. And then the third one, letting go of the imposter syndrome. I want to go now to the next plans, because you're no longer the science advisor. You've done so with lots of rigor and discipline for 20 months. And so now you're diving into further giving back on a science level to Bermuda. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And more specifically, you are seeking to build a genomics research center.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me more about that.
this is a passion that I actually had, and actually, funny enough, an idea I had in 2017. And I'll say that it's all about timing. I had this idea, and I remember when I think I had come back to do a talk about my research at that time. I had said, I want to do genetic study on Bermuda, and if anyone knows anyone with money, like send them my way. I kind of jokingly said that. So I've been kind of put into the public domain that I want to do this. I wanted to come back in 2018 and do it. And then I was advised, you know what, maybe it's not the right time. Maybe go into full-time research and get some more experience and then come back. And so that was why I went to Oxford to get that experience. And it was perfect because I worked in the Oxford Genomics Center. And so I was in the genetic sequencing part of the university and was able to be a project manager as well as a researcher, and was able to kind of lead the nanopore sequencing that was going on there and see everything that was involved. And then the plan was, when I finished that, to come back, and then COVID happened, right? So in 2020, at the end of that year, I was supposed to be kind of setting this up. COVID happened. I'm here, doing diagnostic testing, which is not what I had planned ever in my career ever to be doing. Working with public health officials and, that was not what I wanted to do. But in an indirect way was a silver lining, because now everyone appreciates the need for science. They understand what genetics is a bit more, and sequencing because of the variants. So they know what that is a bit more as well. I don't need to convince anyone on the street that we need to do science research now, because they appreciate that. And then I guess the other thing that came out of it is myself being trusted by the community as a scientist, which is really important, because if you're now looking to, for the first time, starting to do research in said a population, you need to have the trust of the people. And so that has been also a silver lining of what's happened. And then also people are very appreciative of me leaving my career. A research career at Oxford was a big deal. They appreciate the sacrifice I've made. And I didn't mention my first 6 months that I worked in Bermuda. So from April, May, June, July, August, September, I worked for free. So I didn't charge the government of Bermuda anything to set up the lab and start doing the testing and allow the airport to open, because we had a really strict testing regime. So I did all that as just giving back, because I felt, they had invested in me for my scholarships. This was my way to give back. So people remember that. And so my reputation right now in my country is really good, to say the least. And so it's all about the timing of things. And so, yeah, I am looking to now focus on getting back into research, but not doing it somewhere else, doing it in my country. The other thing I haven't mentioned is that I had to train all the staff for the lab that we created. And so now there are young people in Bermuda that know how to do, molecular testing, which didn't before. And so looking to now expand, have the Bermuda Principles Genomics Research Center launched this year in Bermuda, and that we start doing research on Bermudians to look at different aspects of health and how our genomics can inform that and better inform the doctors to give them a better treatment plan. And so that's exciting. I wasn't able to kind of run the charity or have the charity going whilst I was the advisor to the premier and the director of the lab, getting that back up and running as well. And I'm really excited that we are looking to have our 5th conference in February 2023. We took 2 years off, but looking to bring people back to Bermuda and talk about how we've gotten through this whole pandemic and how science and genetics really has played a role in that. So yeah, it's exciting times. It's a bit scary because you don't know that I don't have a job per se right now. I said I'm in my mini retirement. But it's entering that entrepreneurial space and being in charge of my future and just forging a new path, because this is it's completely different to what anyone's done in Bermuda. And just going for this goal and things are all falling in place. I mean, me and you meeting was, just happenstance on Twitter. I was just scrolling and saw this Twitter space, and it's just like that keeps happening, and it's all about the right time. And so, yeah. Studying.
100%. I was about to say it's an entrepreneurial life because it
Yeah.
reminds me very much when I started TeachPitch and the other company, because full disclosure for everyone listening, I started another company next to TeachPitch, which is called genomes.io, which is all about helping individuals to manage their genomic data, so their DNA data, because if you look at how the market is evolving, but also how we treat genomic data, it's not always done in the right way. So a lot of the genomic data, once it is sequenced, so once your DNA is sequenced, then it is given to people that can do with it whatever they please. So they can cross-sell it, or they can give it to people in the insurance business, or they can give it to a wide variety of organizations, maybe in a way or in a level that you do not want your data to be dealt with in such a way. And what you should also know about your genome or your DNA is that it is the blueprint to who you are. So it doesn't really get more personal than that, right? So when we talk about the privacy of data, then that's very, very relevant in an era where people just want to do the right thing with their data, specifically when dealing with technology tools. So Carika and I met on a Twitter space. And from there on, we spoke to each other a few times, and I'm happy to say that we're now exploring routes to work together with genomes.io and Carika's initiative, the New Genomics Research Center. Carika, thank you very, very much for this interview. I have 3 very last questions. One, very quickly, what would you say to the next generations of Carika Weldons in this world?
I think the one thing I would say is to listen to your heart. And then that sounds very generic, but you can tell when something doesn't sit right with you and when something does. Don't ignore that. Don't do something just because it seems like the easier thing to do, or because it seems like, a path that many people have gone and it's clearer how that path ends. Don't do that if that's not what sits right with you. If your passion and your love and your desire is somewhere else and it is something new, the mentality that I had, and I would tell you during my PhD, I did not always want to go into the lab. Like, sometimes I was just too tired. I mean, it snowed sometimes. I'm from Bermuda. I'm from an island. I don't like snow. I didn't want to go into it, but, I had to think, I used to think, and I'll say this, I used to think, I need to do this because I know that there are young girls that will be looking up to me when I do accomplish this. And that I used to tell myself. And so I do have, a lot of young girls in Bermuda who look up to me and elsewhere. But that was my driving factor. But you really have to think, okay, I am the pioneer of doing this, and not, well, this is going to be too difficult, because if it's meant to be, everything will open up at the right time. And sometimes you're shocked with it, but it does happen. So that would be my advice to anyone who is trying to, get into something new. And it doesn't have to be science. It could be anything else.
Anything.
Just do not limit yourself. And I will say this as well. I remember I was told to go and do my PhD. I think I mentioned God told me to do it at that particular time. And now it's crazy because the timeline of everything prior to me coming back for COVID is like every single step was preparing me for being like in this role that I was in Bermuda. And if I had delayed, then I wouldn't have been as prepared. So don't delay either. Whenever get an opportunity, go right for it. Seize the moment.
Correct. Yeah. Any recommended reading? Is there one book that inspired you that you would like to share with our audience?
I'm not really a big reader. I think a lot of people. Yeah, I don't have a book to recommend. I think what's more so inspired me has been other people and, seeing their stories.
That's okay. So that actually is a very nice bridge to my very, very last question. Who would you want to interview? So now this is the Dr. Carika Weldon podcast. Who would be your first guest?
Oh,
Can be dead or alive.
Oh, that's a big question. I'm thinking of Rosalind Franklin. So Rosalind Franklin was actually the person that discovered the structure of DNA. She was the one that actually done it, but didn't get credit. And
Okay. Oh, wow.
that drives me nuts to this day that that's how it all played out. So I would want to interview her because I feel like she would have experienced a lot more in terms of like being a woman in science and to understand what she went through so that we can ensure we get rid of it. Yeah. That would be my answer to that. Yeah.
That's a beautiful answer. So Rosalind Franklin.
Yeah.
Dr. Carika Weldon, thank you so very much for this interview. I am confident that not only Bermuda, but the world will hear a lot more from you in the time to come. I wish you all the very best with Bermuda Principles, at the Genomics Research Center, your new conference is in 2023, and all the great things you're bound to create. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Kevin MacLeod for our beautiful theme music, Le Grand Chase. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles. Project coordination by Inva Cheney.